Hello and welcome everybody. So I had a comment on one of the videos that was asking what the difference is between the regular, you know, um, regular forms of the letters. I don't know if regular is the right term, and that and of the final Sophete letters, those which only show up at the end of a word and are written differently depending on whether they're in the middle of a word or at the end. So those letters include mem. You're going to have the final mem, the final Kaph, final nun, final Tsade, and final pei. So when we're going through these, while I don't think that there is much more of a basic understanding of the difference between them, other than they look different and you write them different when they show up at the end of a word. Someone might give you that answer, and basically it's fair, but I'm a bit more nerdy than that. So when someone asked that question, I thought, well, I don't know. Let me go see. So I basically just kind of did some research for you, and I found something really interesting. There may be more of an answer than this. There's certainly less of an answer than this. We're going to start here, and I just wanted to share with you guys what it is that I'm finding as far as some of these really cool uh, nuggets of things that you can just kind of take and find interesting, and they don't really need to affect your spiritual walk all that much. They're more just there for information's sake. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through a little bit of Talmud this morning, and I am going to present to you with some examples of letters as we go through, just so you can see which ones we're talking about. That also, as we read through this, we're going to talk about what Talmud has to say about some of these final letters, and even some Hebrew words along the way, which are really interesting. So um, we will go ahead then, and I'm going to pull up Blue Letter Bible. Y'all know I love my Blue Letter Bible. One of the things I'm going to do here is I figured it would just be really simple, and this would be kind of a fun fact thing to show everybody. For those who don't know, in Zephaniah 3:9, there is a verse that says, "For then I will turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent." That pure language, a lot of people have been like, well, what is that? Well, the interesting part about it is Zephaniah 3:8, which, let's face it, is not exactly a verse you want on your wall, like, the destruction of the nations and devoured with fire and my jealousy. Still, it's a pretty cool verse, because if you go to the interlinear and you see, again, this is just before the prophecy of returning the people to a pure language, that they may call upon the name of the Lord, that in the verse just before this, in Zephaniah 3:8, every single Hebrew letter shows up, including the final forms. It's kind of like the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog, that every single letter is going to show up in the alphabet right here in this verse. And so, of course, people have spoken a lot about that prophecy and its connectedness to this. What is going to work for our purposes today is just getting an example of each of the Hebrew letter forms and being able to see all of them in one spot. I'm going to zoom us in. Maybe not that far. We'll do this so we don't lose the screen. That'll be perfect. Okay, so we're in Zephaniah 3:8 for the sake of the example of the final forms. As I'm doing the presentation option here, unfortunately, it's going to pop up with a couple things, which is actually kind of cool. I got to remember that it does that. So what I'm going to do here, though, is point out each of the letters as we're going. So let's back up and start reading out of. This is Tractate Shabbat 104a. And yes, this kind of starts in the middle of the letter. You will learn, if you read more Talmud, excuse those, that it doesn't read easily. So obviously we'll see that here, but that's why I want to walk you through it. So they're talking about the final forms. One of the things that they're going to use as a term here is to say elevates its status. So they're giving a sort of weight to the letters themselves, and as far as context goes, just before this, what they're talking about is if someone were to not complete the word shamim and only write shem, then in like a legal situation, you have to be able to debate what was happening there. Now, if the name is Shem and he meant to stop there, he'd write with the final mem and you'd know that was the end of the word, right? If he wrote Shin mem with an open mem, then you would assume that the word was incomplete. Get what I'm saying? So it's actually kind of interesting how they talk through some of these things. So they're saying that in some cases, even in Torah, apparently, I actually found this interesting, and I'll just back it up to read it. Um, let's see. Oh, maybe we're not there. I'm so sorry. One of the things that they point out is rendering an open letter closed or a closed letter open has differences of what is acceptable and what isn't. So anyway, I'll keep going and stay on topic here. The letters mem and samek, we're reading here, that were in the tablets were standing miraculously. Let's back up. The letters mem and samek. So it's talking about the final letters here. Final mem is this last one at the end of the word here, and samech, it's right here, second to last letter. That one there, see how they're fully closed letters? So for each of these, supposedly, the tablets of the Ten Commandments were carved all the way through. Now, for any of these letters with the open ones and everything, that's fine. That's no problem. It's like carving a pumpkin. But as anybody knows, you can't carve all the way through something that is going to be a closed thing and still have the center there. But miraculously, so says Talmud, the letters mem and samek that were in the tablets were standing miraculously. Each letter was chiseled all the way through the tablets. In that case, the segment of the tablets at the center of the samek and final mem, letters that are completely closed, should have fallen. Miraculously, they remained in place. Consequently, rendering an open mem closed elevates its status. So that's interesting. We can stop there for a second just to see what they're saying. So rendering an open mem closed. If you were to write this word accidentally with a closed mem, you've actually like kind of given a weird honor to the not to say that you should do that intentionally, that's not a good idea, but it's if you stick a final mem in the middle of a word, it doesn't negate the word. And we can maybe talk about an occurrence where supposedly there is a final mem in the middle of a word in Isaiah 9, supposedly in the uh, prophecy of the virgin birth. That's a much longer discussion, I think, because that is still up for debate, and I will maybe tell that story someday. But know that there is in Scripture a couple occurrences of those weird things where the rabbis actually just debate what that means to have a closed mem in the middle of a word. Back to Talmud. However, if one rendered a closed letter open, he diminishes its status. So if you were to end a word with with an open mem, you've done something wrong. As Rabbi Yirmiyah said, and some say that it was Rabbi Chiya bar Abba who said, the prophets instituted the difference between the open and closed forms of the mem, nun, tzadi, pei, kaf. Since the closed letters date back to the Ten Commandments, apparently the prophets introduced the open versions of the letters, which are therefore less significant. Okay, so let's stop here. This idea of significance and elevated status is talking about when they arose. A couple of rabbis say, well, that all of the final letters were the only letters for Mem, Nun, Tzadi, Pei, Kaf, and that those existed in the Ten Commandments, and that because they had to if they were standing miraculously. See what I mean? So when they come through here, they're saying that the prophets introduced the open versions of the letters in the middle of the word, and therefore it wasn't given by God at Sinai. It was established by the prophets later on, and therefore are less significant. This is interesting then, because here comes the conversation. The Gemara rejects this. And is that reasonable? Isn't it written, these are the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses to tell the children of Israel at Mount Sinai? The word these underscores that a prophet is not permitted to introduce any new element related to Torah and its mitzvot from here on. Rather, the prophets did not innovate these forms. Both the open and closed versions existed before then. However, people did not know which form appeared in the middle of a word and which form at the end of a word. Interesting. And the prophets came and instituted their set positions. So this one is saying that no, they both existed. We just didn't know who put what where, so the prophets really solidified that. Then the Gemara asks, and still the question remains, didn't the sages derive from the verse, these are the commandments that a prophet is not permitted to introduce any new element from here on? How could they institute the position of the letters? Rather, over the course of time, the people forgot their positions in the words, and the prophets then reestablished their positions. Apparently, those closed letters are no more significant than the open ones. All right, so this is kind of the conclusion that they've come to. So supposedly, like, you know, they just forgot what went where. So when they brought it back, it wasn't like a new thing. They just brought it back. So it's kind of interesting how it is that they are rendering each of these and levels of significance based on when they started and who established them. The conclusion, I think, ultimately being there's no real difference between the middle and the final letters as far as their status in Torah, because they existed in Torah when it was given, and they're equal, apparently. The Gemara returns to discuss the matter itself. Rav Chisda said, the letters Mem and Samek that were in the tablets were standing miraculously. And furthermore, Rav Chisda said, the writing on the tablets was read from the inside, one from one side of the tablets, and read from the outside, the other side of the tablets, in reverse order. Gemara cites words that appear elsewhere in the Bible. Nevuv was read as Bet Vav Bet Nun, Rahav as Bet He Resh, and Saru as Vav Resh Samech. So what it's saying here, because they were written all the way through, supposedly, you could read it on the front side or on the back side. Just by reading it on the back side, you're reading it in reverse order, in a sort of mirror sense. Now, what they're saying is that there are some words that are actual words. so, um, so nevuv, then read backwards, is um, bevavin, beuven, maybe. Of course, these aren't pointillated or anything. So Rahav would be read as Bahar, or Saru would be read as um, Varosh. Uh, yeah, Varosh, maybe. I don't know. That's funny. I'd have to kind of track some of this down a little bit more to see what the sort of. It says the Gemara cites words, so I think this is probably discussed elsewhere. Now, it is worth mentioning that all of this is meant to kind of explore what that original question from one of the viewers was asking, I guess, that for there to be a difference, like why even have a final and why have a middle? On the one hand, I think some of it is to probably just from a grammatical standpoint point out wherein there is an end. Of course, Hebrew doesn't have periods. The fact that you can see a little period here, a little period there, doesn't exist in the Torah scroll. It never did. So when you're just reading, there are a couple spaces, there are a couple dramatizations in the letters that you can see, but for the most part, there is no punctuation. So to know where something was complete actually, I think, adds some emphasis to what you're reading and knowing and understanding. So for each of those letters, there is probably some significance even in that we could probably discover as we read. Of course, with Hebrew and the sort of spiritual side of it, there's always more that the rabbis and others are able and have pulled out of it as far as meaning, and that's some of what I think is coming up here. What's being explained is a status given to the letters that were part of Torah, right? So for anything that may have existed otherwise, certain rabbis say, oh, those weren't there, so they're not as important. That's what's happening here. But as far as the difference in the meanings of the letters and the numbers and all that, the letter correspondence are all the same. So when you're adding up a letter, none is still the same numerical value, stuff like that. So to say that there is a difference is hard to know, but or what the reason for the difference is. So it's just a bit of an opportunity to explore those questions and I'm sorry, but not really land on an answer, but that's just kind of how Jewish thought goes. Is it this or this? Yes. Thanks for tuning in all. Have a good one.